Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome. So, my name is Heather Cannings, and I lead our women entrepreneurship programming here at Adventure, which includes StrikeUp. We are so glad to have you here today. So, it is my pleasure to introduce you to today's StrikeUP Connects session, Exporting for Growth, Getting Started with Your Export Plan, presented in collaboration with Export Development Canada and the Forum for International Trade Training. So, for anyone joining a StrikeUp event for the first time, a very quick introduction of who we are. So, StrikeUp is a free national initiative of Adventure designed to support women entrepreneurs across Canada through practical education, meaningful connections, and access to opportunities that help businesses start, grow, and thrive. Our StrikeUp Connect series brings experts and organizations from across the entrepreneurial ecosystem directly to our community throughout the year. And today, we're talking about an area that can feel like a very big next step for businesses, expanding beyond Canada. So, whether exporting is something you've only started thinking about, you're actively exploring new markets, or you're trying to figure out what an actual export plan should look like, our goal today is to give you practical information, tools, and resources to help you move forward with more confidence. So, before we begin, I want to acknowledge that we are gathered virtually from many places across Canada. And I am hosting from Cobourg, Ontario, and I want to respectfully acknowledge that I'm located in the traditional and treaty territories of the Mississauga and the Chippewa Nations, collectively known as the Williams Treaties First Nations. And we are grateful for the opportunity to live, work, and gather on these lands. So, just a few quick housekeeping notes before we get started. Today's session is being recorded, and everyone who's registered will receive a follow-up later today with a link to rewatch this session, along with some additional resources from Export Development Canada, EDC, and the Forum for International Trade Training, FITT, including the FITT and EDC Export Vision Board that Lora will introduce today. So live captions and translated captions are also available through Zoom in today's sessions. So to turn them on, select the captions button in your Zoom toolbar. You can also select your preferred translated caption language from the captions menu. So we also really want this session to be useful to you. So as the presentation goes on, please put any of your questions in the chat throughout the presentation. You do not need to wait to the end. So I'll be keeping an eye on those as we go, and we'll come back after Laura's presentation to get through as many as we can in our remaining time. And we'll also share some helpful links in the chat throughout today's session. So with that, I'm very pleased to introduce our first speaker, Anne-Gabrielle Berthaud, an engagement lead with Export Development Canada. Anne's going to start us off with a brief introduction to EDC, including how they support Canadian businesses as they explore international growth, some of the products, services, and resources available to exporters, and the work EDC is doing to support women-owned and women-led businesses. And thank you so much for joining us today and for collaborating with StrikeUp on this session. And I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Heather. Can I get a thumbs up from you that you're able to see my screen and my presentation? Perfect. Hello, everyone. My name is Anne-Gabrielle Berthaud, but please just call me Anne. Anne-Gabrielle is really just for LinkedIn and taxes. I'm joining today from Toronto as EDC's National Engagement Lead for Inclusive Trade, which I'll explain a little bit in a later slide. But I do want to provide you with just a bit of a presentation about who EDC is and the role we play in the larger trade ecosystem in Canada, just for context. So I won't take too long, given that the meat of the presentation is going to be delivered by Lora. But essentially, EDC, or Export Development Canada, is Canada's export credit agency. We've been around for over 80 years now, and we've helped companies across the country from coast to coast to coast in scaling, growing, and succeeding in international markets. And we do this through our suite of financial and non-financial solutions, which are primarily loans, loan guarantees, insurance solution to help you mitigate risk as you start selling and scaling internationally. My team, more specifically, EDC's Inclusive Trade Team, is a small and mighty team within the larger EDC group that is dedicated to deepening our engagement with underserved Canadians, so women, Indigenous peoples, Black and racialized Canadians, people with disabilities, and members of the 2S LGBTQ community that may have never heard of EDC or never heard of the solutions that are available to them as they start to grow outside of our borders, and hence our partnership with StrikeUP for today's panel. Really, our focus for specifically for women-owned businesses, which is StrikeUp's audience, is around really 5 core pillars, which is building awareness, right? Telling them about the benefits of exporting through panels such as this one with our partners at FITT, educating them and providing them with the missing knowledge that they would require as they start to really think about their business as a global business, connecting them with key partners in the ecosystem that are dedicated to supporting women entrepreneurs, and enabling and empowering them through our own financial and non-financial solutions. So really think of EDC as a small player in the larger ecosystem. Really everything we do, or the bulk of what we do, is delivered in partnerships. We really don't see ourselves as, bigger than any of the other players. Those would be the Trade Commissioner Service, our partners at BDC, the financial institutions, so the Chartered Banks of Canada, the Women Enterprise Organizations of Canada, such as, StrikeUp, We Connect International, etc., and inclusive entrepreneurships organization and chambers of commerce, such as the Canada Africa Chamber of Commerce, with whom we've worked with a little bit this week. So EDC, really think of EDC's offering as a complement to what some of these partners are doing as you start to want to work with us. Briefly, again, I don't want to make this a EDC 101 presentation, but when you think of EDC, think of kind of the 3 core suites we operate in. So really knowledge, which is our My EDC platform, which you can access for free on our website. That's really where you get the bulk of the information you need, whether that's market intelligence for the markets of your choosing, how to start building out the export plan or your export strategy, leveraging specific knowledge around, tariffs or trade restrictions, or connecting with the freight forwarder. You can do all of that for free through our knowledge hub. And then when you start thinking about EDC's financial solutions, there's kind of 2 areas we really play in, which is protecting exporters against risk. So that's our insurance program suite, where EDC is insuring your sales internationally. And then lastly, we help you unlock additional financing with the bank of your choice, the chartered bank of your choosing, by providing them with guarantees that enhance your borrowing capacity. So I'm always happy to speak more about EDC's core solutions in a final follow-up call. You'll have my contact at the end of this panel. But really, I've also included in my presentation a few resources and links to get you started. These are all redirecting you to our free knowledge hub. So all of these are free resources. But again, like I said, I'm available to connect in a call or via email if you have core questions about EDC's financial solutions. And that's really it for me. I'm happy to be part of this today. I'll hand it back to Heather, and I'll be available if there are questions in the Q&A period specifically for EDC.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Anne. We appreciate it. There is a full suite of resources from EDC. We are big EDC fans here at StrikeUp. So please make sure you check those out. So next we have got Lora. So Lora will be presenting bulk of our StrikeUp Connects today. So welcome so much, Lora. And I'll hand it over to you. Like I said, if there's any questions that come up, please feel free to throw them in the chat, and we'll go through them with Lora at the end of the presentation, and if you have any for Anne as well. So thanks so much, Lora.
Excellent. Thanks so much, Heather. Thanks, Anne, for that. And StrikeUp for having me here today. Before I get started, can you see me advancing?
We can. You are all good.
Whoops. Okay, wonderful. I'm going to go back. All right. So thank you, everyone, for being here today. I will try to be brief because I know that I don't have too much time, but my My idea today is to provide you with some considerations that you may not have thought of before, wherever you are on that export continuum, whether you're just looking at exporting, whether you're currently exporting, but maybe that the market that you're exporting to has had a change in policy perhaps, or that you're now looking to diversify. So whatever that might be, there's always something to glean at whatever stage of exporting that you're at. So thank you for being here. I'm, as was mentioned, so I am the Partnerships and Community Lead at FITT. FITT is the Forum for International Trade Training. We're headquartered in Ottawa, but what we are, or who we are, is we are the leading provider of specific training in international trade. So we train professionals in order to navigate all of the complexities in international trade. And it doesn't matter if you're looking to whatever market you're looking to go into, or whatever your market you're currently from. Our FITT Skills training, our core program, is country neutral and it's industry neutral. So it's about applying those best practices and those frameworks in order for you to assess opportunity and risk for any market that you're looking to expand into. So you can see on the bottom left, and throughout my whole presentation, our training is co-branded with Export Development Canada. We partnered many years ago. We are EDCs, and Anne mentioned the knowledge piece for Export Development Canada. So this is our international business program. It's 6 courses, everything from feasibility of international trade, which I'll spend quite a bit of time on today, through to international market entry strategies, global value chain, trade finance, how to modify a product or service for global markets, and international sales and marketing. As I mentioned, partnerships and community lead at FITT. I'm also a certified international trade professional, so that is a specific designation in international trade, certified by FITT, as well as an ICC certified Incoterms trainer. So for those of you that are product exporters or looking to be product exporters, Incoterms, if you're not very familiar with Incoterms, you should be, and that might be an area you wish to learn about. Here's my LinkedIn profile. Feel free to connect with me, and happy to connect and answer any questions you might have. So we're going to go through a little bit about your motivations for exporting. Why are you looking to export? Why are you here today on a webinar that's talking about exporting? I'm going to go over some of the benefits and challenges of exporting, market diversification, spend some time on export readiness and feasibility, because it's really fundamental actually. And then I'll touch on sales, marketing, and some financing considerations. And then I'm going to dive into the Export Vision Board, which is a tool that hopefully will help you for whatever stage of your exporting journey you're at. And then I'll leave you with some tools and some other tools and resources to help you with your next steps. So why export? So studies have shown that exporting can be profitable for businesses of all sizes. So big misconception is that you're too small to export. That's not true. Often companies that export, it doesn't matter the size, but it leads to greater profitability. So on average, sales grow faster, more jobs are created, and companies who export gain a significant competitive advantage. What's important, though, is to understand what your motivational factors are. So is it to generate new revenue streams? Is it to increase your own competitiveness? Because studies have shown that once you start exporting and entering into new markets where there's more competition, that increases your own competitiveness. Sometimes there's unique technology or some expertise that you can gain by partnering with someone in a market. or oh, I don't know what happened here with my presentation. That's strange. Let's try this again. Um,
Coming back up there. We just see
okay,
PowerPoint. There we go.
okay. Can you see it?
Yes, all
Okay.
good.
So sometimes, by partnering with someone, by partnering with another organization in a market, you can increase, you can adopt a new technology, new level of expertise, you can increase your own capabilities. And if your motivational factor is that exporting is part of your long-term expansion, long-term strategy, then you need to understand that you might be in it for the long run to for long-term sustainability of your business. Here's an article. I'm not going to read the every point on here, but it's an article from the Vault. It's one of EDC's blogs about why exporters are more successful. So it'll walk you through those 7 areas, which I just mentioned, about how it helps you increase your productivity, economic resilience, better connections, et cetera, et cetera. Okay, so some of the advantages of exporting, higher profits, and I've just touched on a few of these higher profits. You create economies of scale, or you're reducing your vulnerabilities. You can gain new knowledge and experience, increase your global competitiveness, your domestic competitiveness. And if you have a long-term, like an export strategy, you can apply in an export plan, you can apply to different programs, exporting programs. So those are the advantages of exporting, but I would be remiss if I didn't touch on some of the challenges. So, there are increased costs and risks to exporting. There are longer payment terms in general. So maybe you're used to net 30, you go into another market, it might be net 60, net 90. And then the payment terms could be completely different on how they will pay. Do they insist on letters of credit? So there are different costs and risks. There are also like in terms of payment, there's also foreign exchange risks. So understanding how you're going to quote your product or service, which currency, understanding the volatility of that currency can be a challenge. The level of commitment. Companies need to understand that they're in it in some cases, many cases, for the long haul. That business development takes time. Business development takes time in new markets where certain businesses need to get to know you first, need to get to know the organization before they even start talking about contracts and orders. So understanding that it does take time. But then also understanding that you have to learn when you might need to pull the plug on that, the business development in that market, because I've seen companies that have spent numerous years trying to establish representation or a partner in a market, and time is money. So understanding when maybe you need to say, okay, this is not the market for us, even though you've invested maybe in some cases 2-3 years trying to develop business. So that level of commitment is different. Language, time zones, and cultural differences can be challenging. The type of relationship you need to establish with your buyer or your partner can present some challenges because you need to understand um, the infrastructure in the market and the culture of your partner, because they may not want to work directly. They may want to work through a local agent, a local representative. So understanding the culture of the market that you're going into is paramount. And then increased paperwork. Contract structure is different. There could be, a lot more paperwork, some red tape to hop through that you need to navigate. So understanding that that can be challenging and that can take time. And then accessibility is important because sometimes you may not be aware of if you can actually access the market. Do you have everything? Can you comply with all the regulation? Do you have all the required documentation to access that market? Can you access free trade agreements and the benefits through free trade agreements? So that can be challenging for some exporters. And then understanding the competition in the market and understanding that there could be a lot more competition than you're used to can be very challenging. So wherever we talk about the export continuum, so I'm glad you're here today because it doesn't matter where you are on this continuum from export unaware, maybe you really haven't thought much about exporting, through to export aware, export interested, or you could be export experienced, except that you might be exporting to the United States, for example, or any other market. And we know that things change all the time. Trade policies change. There are more geopolitical uncertainties, so you may be looking to diversify. But what's important is that the level of assistance that you need kind of depends on what stage you're at. So you might want to, if you're export interested, you might be looking for that general information. If you're more export aware and you're looking to take those next steps, you might need some export counseling, some market entry support. If you've actually got a contract or you're about to sign, you might need some export financing. So, Anne talked about the ecosystem, but EDC is where you would reach out to for that export financing. Sometimes you need in-market assistance, and you might be exporting to that country, but you need something happen. Something, maybe your shipment is held up at the border, so you might need the assistance of the Global Affairs Canada, Canadian Trade Commissioner Service in the market. But so it's about understanding the ecosystem, understanding the support that's available to you at every stage of the continuum. However, I've highlighted in yellow or orange skills development, because what's important is that from the very first stage where you need to understand, what markets have the most potential. Am I in a position to start exporting? You need to have those skills in order to understand opportunities, to assess those opportunities, to then to create your market entry strategy, to how are you going to move your products into that market, what support you're going to need to reach out to. So that skills development happens throughout the whole continuum. So having somebody on your team, having a champion that gains those practical skills and does that professional development so that they can piece all of these aspects together to create a successful export strategy. So export readiness. Successful exporting organizations, there's some key characteristics. So their products or services are successful domestically. Usually companies don't create a business, for international markets. It can happen, but usually there's a track record domestically. The product or service has to be unique in one or more ways. So they have to have a good, unique value proposition. And the products or services must be competitively priced. So the organization itself has, a track record, as I mentioned, specific advantages over the competition in that market, a willingness to invest resources, so that's time, people, capital, without a return for a period of time. The organization is sensitive to and aware of cultural differences in doing business in other countries, and they have conducted their own gap analysis and continue to conduct gap analyses in order to assess their current state, define their gaps, and their gaps could be financing, they're missing those financing resources. It could be their human resources, their human capital. Do they have the right staff to help them enter into new international markets? And then those successful organizations have a plan to address those gaps. So how to choose your target market? First, we screen markets. A company will screen markets for potential opportunities by using secondary research. So those are those market reports that are out there looking at stats, surveys. So that secondary research, which is often called desk research. And then they will assess their target markets, but the assessment should involve primary research as well. That's that direct contact, that one-on-one contact that you require to validate what you found in secondary research, validate your assumptions. And I say this all the time, there's no better way to get primary research than attending a trade show or a trade mission in the country where there are multiple players under one roof. You could, an industry specific trade show. So you could be meeting with competitors. You could be having conversations with competitors, with potential buyers, with potential partners to form a strategic alliance. You could be, other channel intermediaries. You could, everybody under one roof. So it's actually very good use of your time and your budgets, and then often worked into a trade show or B2B matchmaking sessions. So that is a phenomenal way to gather that primary research. And then when you've gathered all this research and you've validated some assumptions, then you draw your conclusions. So I'm often asked, where do you start? So I always start with the global stats first, and then kind of drill down to, where your tariff advantage is and looking at free trade agreements. Canada signed 14 free trade agreements that encompass 51 countries around the globe and have just recently signed 2 others. So you need to understand, like, can you comply under the regulations of the free trade agreement? If you're a product exporter, you're product of Canada, your certificate of origin is product of Canada, and then what are the other factors where you can access the free trade agreement? But you start with the global figures, look for demand. Then you can look at, Trade Data Online, which is industry. I said Canada, where you can create customized reports to find out where Canada's exporting to for your particular product. And also the US, where they're importing from, where they're exporting to. And then you drill further, Canada Tariff Finder to help you find what your tariff advantage is. And because Canada's Tariff Finder is you can look at your tariff advantage, compare it to the most favored nation rate for all countries that Canada has a free trade agreement with. So it's a phenomenal tool if you're not familiar with it. Then you can drill down and you look at product industry related reports. Statista is phenomenal. They're market reports. Sometimes you have to pay for them. You could have a subscription. Sometimes there comes a point where you might need to pay for specific independent research, and then test the waters. So that in-market visit, you need to start with the stats, keep drilling down, and then sometimes you just need to test the waters. So how to screen market, or how do we assess feasibility? Well, you screen markets for size, growth, accessibility, then you establish your priorities. I talked about the primary, secondary research. You really, truly, to assess that potential, you've got to look at how much it's going to cost you to either land your product in the market, or to deliver your service in that market. all the costs that are involved. Um, and then only then, when you understand all the costs that are involved, you determine if there's a margin to be earned. Because if you've done all that, you've exported into a market, either delivered your service or product, and you really haven't made a margin or a sizable margin, then it just might not be worth it. Not now, anyway. And then you reevaluate. And then also understanding part of market feasibility is understanding all the risks involved. So the suitability of your products and services, we spend a lot of time in our training helping an organization, a company determine if their product is suitable for the market. So looking at what adaptations need to be made. Notice I didn't say if a product or service adaptation, it's what needs to be adapted for the particular market you're going into. We also look at that whole regulatory landscape. So can you comply with all regulations in the market? And that's for product and service exporters. And then IP protection. Have you given that some thought? Are you going into a market where there could be, serious risk of IP infringement? And how will you protect yourself, your company against that? And then the whole product liability piece, lots of considerations there. If someone's injured because they're either consuming your product or by, whatever your offering is. So what is the legislation around product liability? So there's a lot there, a lot of considerations. And then sales and marketing. I could spend lots of time talking about sales and marketing. I taught this course for many, many years. I love talking about sales and marketing, but I'll just leave you with this. So the marketing mix, the basic, if you ever taken marketing before, product, price, place, promotion. So understanding, though, in an international context, that marketing mix needs to change, cannot be cookie cutter for each market that you're going into. So what you offer, for example, like your product or your service, doesn't necessarily need to be the same in for every international market. So if you're exporting to the US a specific product or your service offering, when you go into your next international market, let's say you're going into Europe, let's say you're going into one particular country in Europe, that product might not be the same. And then understanding how you're going to enter into that market. Let's say in the United States, you're direct to the end retailer. But in, let's say, Italy, you need to work through, a distributor or a wholesaler or an agent who gets you into that distributor or into the end retailer. So understanding that each element of the marketing mix, it's like a whole new mix each time you go into market. So giving, your market entry strategy, how you priced yourself, which currency. What I put here, unique challenges. So I mentioned Incoterms when I was talking a little bit of a background on myself. So if you're a product exporter, there's two things you should always include in your pricing. One is the exchange rate or the currency that you're quoting in, understanding that if you just put $10, what is it, 10 Canadian dollars, 10 US dollars, or which currency are you going to quote in? And second challenge is Incoterm and choosing the right Incoterm, because I'm just going to give you an example. A $10 box of chocolates, if you're selling and you're giving a price to an Italian buyer, and you're, I don't know, piece by chocolate, $10 for a bar of chocolates, $10 Canadian. But if you don't say if that's ex works or landed into a port in Italy, that's a very different, there are many obligations and that increases the price. So never quote a price without an Incoterm. Um, and so that's all part of the challenges of creating that unique marketing mix for every market you're going into. So sales and business development, understanding, the how you need to develop business in your new target market, how long that's like timelines, budgets, etc. And then when it comes down to negotiation, what are you going to negotiate? What needs to be in those contracts? What are those points of negotiation that you need to really understand your partner in the market? What is their negotiation style? This is where business culture really comes into play. And then that after sales service piece and support takes a lot of consideration. So if you're, used to delivering a specific level of service to your customers in Canada, or maybe if you're in the United States, understanding that it might be difficult or different to offer that same level of service in a new international market that might be an ocean away, and understanding what you can afford to the level of service that you can afford or not. So these are all factors that need to be considered. There's a great article, another EDC article here called The Four Ps of International Marketing. And it just talks about that interconnectivity of every element of the marketing mix and how, that needs to change up according to each market that you go into. Okay, so international trade finance, whether you're self-financed, so whether you're bootstrapped, you're borrowing, you receive funding from maybe Can Export funding, or if you go through a series of raises like venture capital, doesn't matter. What's important is that when you're looking at exporting or exporting into a new international market, you've got to look at those different financing considerations. So that payment risk, is there a risk of getting paid? The currency risk, is there, high volatility in the currency that you're quoting in? Or in the market itself, do they have a lot of currency fluctuations? Is there country risk? Is there social? Is there, political, social unrest? Cash flow. So if you've landed a new contract and you're not going to get paid for a few months, can you cover that? Like if it's putting a lot of squeeze on your cash flow, that's definitely a consideration. But knowing that there is available assistance and resources to help you. So payment risk, you know, EDC, I see Anne nodding her head. So EDC can help you with that payment risk, with the currency risk. Cash flow. Do you need working capital, a loan for working capital to bridge between, yay, we signed that contract. They want to buy, I don't know, half a container till you get paid. Do you need some assistance there? And for risk of getting paid, is it a new customer? Maybe you need some accounts receivable insurance, and that's also something that EDC can help you with. So knowing that there are complexities with trade finance, but there's also support available to you to help you mitigate some of those risks. All right, so we are now at the part where I'm thrilled to share with you. I've given you a lot of considerations, and if you're like me, I like to organize things. I like to organize my thoughts into neat little buckets, and I think I see things in frameworks and checklists and buckets. So what I was finding is that there's a lot of support available to exporters. There are a lot of programs. There are a lot of cohorts for, boot camps and, export training and all this. But what there's so much there that I found that there was almost paralysis for a lot of startups because they just didn't know where to start and they didn't have a tool to to put everything in a structured way, all these considerations, and start jotting things down. So we came up with something called the Export Vision Board, which helps a company to identify those fundamental components of a successful market entry strategy. And a lot of it is what I just covered in in the last 20 minutes. So we've created this export vision board, and we actually have a template for you where you can go through and you can complete it and you can jot it down. And this export vision board really can be the starting tool for you to create your export plan. It's really the foundation of creating your export plan. So the export vision board is 9 buckets. So 9 areas where you need to jot down different elements of your export strategy. So understanding, I talked about this about 20 minutes ago, understanding, what your motivational factors are, why export. But putting that down on paper is paramount. It's really important to have clear objectives and also to identify who needs to be involved. Who are those key stakeholders? Who do you need to get buy-in from? That's really, really important. Is it your board of directors, board of advisors? Is it the bank? Is it EDC? Who are those key stakeholders within your ecosystem? And then talk about your unique value proposition. What makes you unique? And this might be really difficult. And I've done the export vision board. I've done this exercise with a couple companies. And one company, a service provider who provided HR services, actually had to go back to this question at the end after they filled everything else out, because they're like, well, we're not really that unique. I don't know. They had a hard time, so they actually had to answer it at the end. This one is a hard one. Like, really, truly, what makes you unique in that market that you're going into, and then like, where do you want to go? What are your target markets? What markets offer or market singular the most opportunity for success? And initially, before doing the full feasibility assessment, which are your target markets? And then who are your customers? And understanding that your customer segments, like which ones you're trying to reach in the market, and what type of relationship you need to have or you want to establish with those different customer segments. So that one, just because your customer segment in one market is, like, if you're B2B, it's a certain industry vertical. In another market, it could be a completely different industry vertical. So understanding your customer segments and those relationships that you need to establish. And then how will you enter into the market? So this is market entry strategy. So determining how you will deliver your value proposition to your customer segments and who you need to partner with to deliver your service or provide your product or deliver your product in the market, and how you're going to communicate with those different intermediaries. And then the big question is, how will you make money? So what will be your revenue streams? And what will be your revenue stream from each customer segment in the target market? And what are your major costs? The costs that you're the major costs involved in exporting your product in the market. And then, that will help you determine pricing strategies. But this is the start, because it takes a lot of analysis, and you need to determine, really assess the revenue potential and all the costs involved. And then key partnerships that you have. So these are part of your assets, key partnerships that you have. And what are those partnerships, those networks, those alliances that you need um, to develop in order to help you achieve your goals in the market? And then what resources do you have and what resources do you need? So those include physical resources, your IP, your human capital, financing, financial resources. And then this last consideration is to help you put it down on paper. What are those immediate next steps? Because often there's paralysis. I don't know what to do. I don't know like where to start. I don't know when to start, how to start. But putting down, outlining, with your goals, outlining what those critical and strategic actions are that, and putting down, well, my next step with timelines will be XYZ. So understanding, maybe that it'll take a year to land that first sale, but putting it down as a goal and what your next steps are. My next step might be to apply for Can Export funding, or my next step might be to reach out to this ecosystem partner in order to help me build my export plan, or I'm going to upskill myself. I'm going to take the FITT skills training so that I can create that export plan for my company. Or I'm going to hire someone with that skill set that's going to help me create the export plan and execute and try to land that first sale. So understanding what you need to do to get started and writing a few of those key steps down. So, oh, that's pretty good. we're at time. So just think about it yourself. Just here's some questions for you to consider. What is your export vision? Your immediate next steps? What do you need to move forward from here? Here's the link. Heather, you had mentioned that we will send everybody some follow-up resources. As a registrant for today, FITT is offering a 20% discount valid on any FITT skills course. And it's valid until September the 11th. Tools and resources, I'm not going to read them, but you'll have them in the PDF of the PowerPoint. So thank you, everyone, and I will stop sharing.
Thank you so much, Laura. That was a lot of really practical information there. And I especially love having the export vision board as something everyone can actually take away from this and start working on after today. So now we're going to move into our Q&A. If there's any other questions, please feel free to throw them into the chat, but we did really get one really great question here. So to set the stage, Melissa has a client who owns a resort and has expressed ongoing interest in participating in international trade missions. So when developing her export strategy, are there specific factors that she should consider? So something else she added is that I imagine tourism may involve some different considerations than more traditional export sectors. For example, promoting the destination and attracting international visitors rather than exporting a physical product.
Yeah, I always say exporting a physical product is a lot easier because you can picture what you need to do. You can picture the product moving from Canada across the border and, customs and all that kind of stuff. Services are more difficult, but the tourism exports, there's a lot of potential there too. I guess without participating in a trade mission, you'll have to see. So with trade missions, so Canada does focus on priority sectors, right? So the free trade agreement usually, priority sectors and priority markets. Priority markets are usually countries with which Canada has a free trade agreement. Priority sectors are Canada's priority sectors. So you can go onto the Global Affairs website and see what Canada's priority sectors are. Usually the market reports are done for the priority sectors, so and EDC as well. With tourism, you just have to find that trade show, that global trade show that is for the tourism industry. And I know they do exist. I used to work for the government of Chile, and Chile heavily promotes tourism. So there are trade shows out there. You just have to find out where they are. If whether there's going to be a trade mission from Canada to that trade show, that's a little more tricky. But don't forget to reach out like to multiple levels of government. So sometimes municipal governments, like regional governments, provincial, federal, like reach out to every level because they're offering and they're promoting different sectors, right? Like your regional, your municipal government might have trade missions in your industry. But so you've got to, my biggest piece of advice is you have to get onto their radar. And when I worked for a clean tech company, I was on the radar of, I was on everybody's radar because unless you're on the radar, like the provincial government, we would find out about, these clean tech trade missions. And it was only to the first 10 Ontario companies that registered. So we would find out about them and we would sign up and we would be under the provincial um, umbrella, and then which was under the federal umbrella at these trade shows, and it opened up so many doors for us. So reach out to your region, your municipality, your provincial government, even if global affairs, trade commissioner service doesn't have a trade show or a trade mission organized for your industry. So get on the radar so you start finding out about these different events. That's what I would suggest.
Perfect. That's some great advice. So I have a question for you, actually. So, what is one mistake that you see Canadian businesses making when they start exporting that they could have avoided with a little bit more planning up front?
Yeah, I think the biggest mistake is not understanding the full opportunities. So being like a passive exporter and a reactionary exporter. So yay, you got an order for, you got an order for whatever your product, but you don't understand, you've never exported to that market before. And this happens all the time, and you don't understand the regulations and how much it's going to cost you, and which brokers you need to work with, and all of a sudden your product land, you fulfill the order, you land it in the market, but at the end of the day you don't make a profit. So that really wasn't, it's not strategic exporting. And even for service companies, offering your service in a market where you only have one chance to make a good first impression. And if it doesn't go so well, if you partner with um, the wrong, partner, it could be another service provider where the two of you, the two organizations are offering whatever service. If that provider hasn't been vetted and that ruins your reputation, then it's a terrible first way to enter into the market. So not doing that strategic upfront planning and really being selective with market entry and doing all the homework up front, you could lose a lot of money, a lot of money.
Right. So Doreen had said, you mentioned that Canada signed two new trade agreements. Which countries are they with?
Yeah, Indonesia, and that was signed in 2025, and Ecuador was just signed recently. So they've both been signed, but they haven't been ratified through, the legislative process, but they both were signed. Indonesia is a huge market with a lot of potential. I see Anne, you're nodding your head. So on a recent event that I had, my guest was Sean Edmund, who's the chief representative in Indonesia. And after listening to him, I thought, oh, every exporter needs to think about Indonesia. And it's not just Indonesia, it's about understanding where your opportunities are, and can you make a profit in that market? Can you compete against all the competition in that market? But there's a lot of opportunity. There really is a lot of opportunity, but you need to be in a position where you can seize those opportunities for sure.
Perfect. And then one last question, we've got a few minutes left here. So if you're thinking about smaller businesses that may not have a dedicated export team or a huge budget, what do you think is the most important thing that they get right before investing significant time or money into international expansion?
Yeah, I think the ones, and I said at the beginning, you're not too small to start exporting, but the caveat is that you need a champion on your team. You need somebody that exporting isn't just a side project. You need to treat it as like a strategy. Like you need to treat it as, part of your business. And that champion needs to understand, what's involved, all the nuances, understanding what they need to research, not just researching for the sake of researching, understanding how they identify that market with the most potential, and not to dilute precious resources by trying to enter into, I love when companies say, I'm going to export to Europe. I'm going to take advantage of CETA. Well, Europe, how many countries? I should have looked that up. How many countries are in Europe? I know that there are a lot. And like Germany is very different than Italy, than Spain, than some of the Scandinavian countries. So where are you going to export to? And also keeping in mind that a whole country is not your target market. Understanding, I talked about that, the customer segments. Who are you going to target in that market? Not everyone's your buyer, not everyone's your potential client. What is your customer segment in that market? So really understanding, and that means that you have to have a champion that can help you connect all the dots for you and reaching out for support when it's needed, not preliminary, because Global Affairs Canada Trade Commissioner Service isn't going to help you create your export plan. EDC is not going to help you create your export plan. They can provide the tools and resources and then all the other support, but only you understand your product, your industry, your service. So you need to be able to piece all of that together. You don't know your business, like nobody else knows your business better than you do.
Amazing. Well, I think that's a really great place for us to wrap up. So, Lora, thank you so much for sharing your expertise with us today and making what can be a pretty complex topic feel much more approachable. And a huge thank you to both Export Development Canada and the Forum for International Trade Training for collaborating with StrikeUp to bring this session to our community. And so just before everyone disappears, I want to quickly tell you about two more free events that StrikeUp has coming up. So first, on September 24th, we're launching our new StrikeUp Signature Series with Make Your Mark. So you can think of the Signature Series as kind of a mini StrikeUp conference. So a focus 2-hour virtual event combining a great keynote and honest founder conversation, facilitated networking with entrepreneurs all across Canada. So for Make Your Mark, Vivian Kay will be joining us as a keynote focused on building your brand without breaking the bank. So Vivian knows exactly what it takes to build visibility and momentum with a limited budget, and will share practical lessons entrepreneurs can actually apply. We'll then move into our featured founder conversation, what made the difference, the relationships, risks, and realities behind early growth. We'll get beyond the highlight reel and talk about what actually makes a difference when these founders built visibility, trust, and traction. We'll then finish with 30 minutes of breakout networking where you can choose from conversations that's most useful to you. So you can select from brand voice and visibility, first sales and early clients, tools and resources that you want to share, or just open networking. The event is free and virtual, and we would love to have you join us. Then on November 4th, we're continuing our StrikeUP Connects series with the Women Women Entrepreneurship Knowledge Hub during Global Entrepreneurship Week. So today's session is really about a foundation. So why export, how to think about readiness, and how to start building an export plan. The November session will continue that journey on a more impact focused perspective, looking at global entrepreneurship, scaling and trade for women entrepreneurs who are thinking bigger and where their businesses can go. So if today's conversation has you thinking about exporting, international growth be part of your future, we'd encourage you to join us again in November. So registration links for both events are now in the chat and will be in your wrap-up email coming shortly. And with that, thank you again to Anne, Lora, EDC, and FITT. And thank you to all of you for spending part of your day with us. Keep an eye on your inbox later today for the link to the recording and resources from the session. And hopefully we'll see many of you again at Make Your Mark in September and our next StrikeUP Connects session in November. So enjoy the rest of your day, everyone, and we hope to see you again soon. Thank you so much.